There may have been 8 million stories in The Naked City, but we only got to see 138 of them on the TV series, The Naked City. Jim Rosin joins us again to talk about this show and his book, which is called Naked City, the television series, appropriately enough. And Jim, thanks so much for coming on.
Well, thank you for having me, Ghosty. It's always fun to converse with you, you know.
Yeah, this is like a running thing we've got here, you know.
Well,
chatting
listen,
about
I'm not against it.
You know, I think a lot of people are familiar with the series, especially recently, because it seems to have been revived on these sub-channels. Yeah,
it's on MeTV.
Right.
And it's also a new company has come out with a DVD of all 4 seasons. The first year, which were half-hour shows, and then the 3 subsequent seasons, which were 1 hour, and they've put out all 4 years.
I think people might be aware that the TV series was based on the film The Naked City from 1948. Maybe I'm wrong. Maybe they aren't aware of that. But that was also based on a book.
Yeah, the way I remember it is the idea came from a series of photographs by Ouija.
Yeah.
And then Mark Hellinger, who was a big-time, producer in New York, made the movie with Jules Dassin directed it. And it had kind of a semi-documentary flavor to it. And Barry Fitzgerald played the Muldoon, the wise old detective. And I think it was Don Taylor that played Jimmy Halloran, his young partner. And they tracked this killer in Manhattan, but it was filmed on location, and it really had a very honest flavor to it.
And while it's not uncommon for films to be shot on location, pretty rare for television, especially in that time period, 1958, 59, 60.
It was. The first season, the half-hour shows were 1958 to 59, and they were the first, I think, film television series to shoot in New York. Naked City was filmed, in the Bronx and Manhattan, and they didn't have the permits and the licenses that were required to shoot on the street. It's much easier now, and you have a New York film office. None of that existed in the late 50s. Plus, the weather was a factor.
Yeah.
And the logistics of shooting, in the city was very difficult. And, then, of course, at that time, they did 39 shows.
For a season,
after 25, John McIntyre said he wanted out. He didn't enjoy the rigors of New York City. And, he had come from the West Coast, and, he had primarily worked in movies all his career, and, working in a weekly series in New York was something different for him. And then James Franciscus, he was the new kid on the block, so he, I don't think, really had done too much in Hollywood, if anything, prior to Naked City. And, he chose not to come back at the end of the run. The show was canceled, but when they renewed it a year later, and at that point, Franciscus was really the star of the show, as Jimmy Halloran.
Right.
And he said, no, I think, he was fairly active in L.A. at that point. He was working a lot. So I don't think he wanted to, pack up and leave L.A. and go back to New York to do an hour series. Because, again, he had a taste of it. So Paul Burt came in and played the young detective role, Adam Flint.
I guess we should go back and mention that the first season of The Naked City was a half-hour drama series.
Exactly, yeah.
Yeah, and then I guess the ratings weren't all that great, but someone at ABC must have said, well, I think there's more promise to this. Let's keep it going. Why was it canceled and then brought back?
Well, I think the ratings were not very good, or not good enough. Burt Leonard and Sterling Silverman lobbied the networks, along with some advertisers who believed in the show, to bring it back, but in an extended version. And they wound up filming a pilot, 7 or 8 months later, in February of 1960, and the network looked at it and bought it. But what was interesting is right at the same time, they were filming the pilot for Route 66 as well.
Right.
So all of a sudden, Burt Leonard had two shows on the air that, were very, very difficult shows to do. And the one traveling all over the country, and one filmed on location in New York. And he was in L.A., he always stayed in L.A. He had, people running the show in New York. But I think it was called Death of Princes was the first hour show in 1960, A Death of Princes, yeah. And that went on the air in, I guess, October of 1960, and they did 3 seasons of one-hour shows. They filmed, I think, they averaged about 33 shows a season.
It's a hallmark of, I think, Burt Leonard's producing, to have incredible guest stars. In a strange way, and same with Route 66, the series almost seems to maybe focus a little more on the guest stars than the principals.
Both Route 66 and Naked City, the strength of those two shows was that the protagonist sometimes was really the person who drove the storyline, not the series leads. They were the peripheral characters in many of the episodes, and it became like a good ensemble. But the person having a problem in the episode that it for some reason had run afoul of the police, and not necessarily a bad person,
right?
But for some reason was in trouble. They became the focal point, and you felt for them. And I think that's what was the great thing about the show. It was not so much about police procedure as it was more about the ordinary denizens of New York City. That was the strength and power of it. And when you add to the actors that did the show and the filming on location, I think that made for a great appeal. Paul Burke said to me once, the cameraman, during filming one scene, we were talking about how New York was the co-star,
right? And
he was telling about the cameraman saying to him, "Paul, move a little bit to the right. You're upstaging the Chrysler Building." So you could never take a bad picture in New York. It's just a fascinating place to shoot. And when you watch the half-hour shows, you see that when they first started, they took advantage. They were all over the place.
I'm wasting my time. I should be at home making peanut butter sandwiches for the boys.
Mr. McGraw, about this woman that hit you in the back of the head.
Yeah. Big girl with a fuzzy black sweater.
If you were hit in the back of the head, Mr. McGraw, how come you know all her proportions?
I'm very sensitive to such things.
Also, Mr. McGraw, if you were hit in the back of the head by a blonde lady, how do you know it was with a monkey wrench?
Have you ever been hit on the head with a monkey wrench?
Well, no, sir.
Until you have, don't criticize how I know. You boys don't fool me 1 little minute. You act intelligent. You're clean cut. Always with a tie. Yes, sir. No, sir. But you're still a cop.
Mr. McGraw, what have you got against cops?
Sir, let me tell you something. Every year on January the 12th at 7:31 a.m., I am 1 year older, and I don't like it. In fact, I'm against it. Also, I'm against insurance papers, social security numbers, rules, regulations, vaccinations, and all kinds of law and order. Consequently, and therefore, I am against cops.
That's logical.
There are over 100 crimes committed daily in Manhattan alone, and where is the cops? Where is the cops? Nowheres. And playing pinochle at that. Am I correct in that assumption?
We're talking to author and television historian James Rosin. His book is Naked City, the television series. And Jim, I imagine that as the show went on and the cast became more recognizable, that filming on location in New York City had its share of hazards.
Well, yeah, they filmed a lot in the Bronx, too, early on, and then they came down, and I guess, they were filming in New York City, in Manhattan as well, but they had their, I think it was Biograph or Gold Medal Studios at the time in the Bronx, where they filmed where they had their, interiors where they did the police station, and they had swing sets to accommodate, if they needed another set, an interior to do, and they couldn't shoot on a real-life location. So they were based up there, and because they were based up there, they shot around a lot in the Bronx. It might have been a little bit easier to do, but certainly it was not something that was very easy when they were filming in Manhattan. Absolutely. There's a very interesting story in the book that James Sheldon, who did about 12 or 13 episodes, I think, how he was shooting an episode with Carol Rawson and Tony Zerbe, and they're shooting a scene in Times Square. Everybody's going to the theater. They need a lot of people in the background. If they didn't get the shot right away, there'd be nobody around.
Right.
So what he did is he sketched the whole thing out very carefully, and he didn't want, at the same time, he didn't want the background looking at the camera.
Right.
So he put a fake company on the other side of the street. He lit them up very bright, and he downlit the shooting area, the actual shooting area.
Right.
So they had about 10 moves with the camera and the actors in this, I guess it was a 6 or 7 page scene. It was a lengthy scene, and they did it all in one take. And they captured all the background crowds that he needed in the shot, and they were unaware of where they were actually filming. That's a great story.
Yeah. And I would imagine stories such as these can be found in your book, Naked City, the television series, which also has a handy episode guide as well. Yeah,
there's some good stories. I got to tell you another quick one. There's one, this is a funny story. They would shoot 3 nights a week, and usually one of the nights was Wednesday evening. And they'd have 2 units working simultaneously, so a second unit would work without sound. So one night, the second unit needed Paul and Horace McMahon, and they needed them coming out of a building.
Right.
And they just, come out of the building, we'll throw the light on you, and that's all we need. But they were up on the 5th floor. So Paul and Horace McMahon went up on the 5th floor, and they're filming there, and maybe it's a few minutes before 10 o'clock when they need them downstairs. So they're up on the balcony. They throw 3 or 4 portable lights on McMahon and Paul, and it causes this shadow in this elderly lady's cold water flat. So she gets nervous. She pulls open the blinds, and there's Horace McMahon and Paul Burke. Now she really does a take,
right?
Because she looks towards the TV and she screams because she has Naked City on television, and here Paul and Horace McMahon are entering a crime scene. Right. So she really panics. Then she turns and looks back, and they're gone because the second unit had pulled them downstairs to get that shot of them coming out of the building, and they were rolling and running late. But can you imagine her explaining to her neighbors? Right. I tell you, they were just here on my balcony.
Right. They thought, oh, she's losing it.
Yeah, that's a great story. Paul gave me that story. He was a very nice man, and as you watch the hour shows, you realize he brought a quiet dignity to the role of Adam Flint.
Yeah. If people were to, I'm sure they are interested in getting this book, where would they go? What's the best way for them to get it?
Well, there's several sources. The book's on Amazon. It's on my website with all the other books on classic TV that I've done. That's classictvseriesbooks.com. And I think you can also get it on oldies.com. That's a wonderful site. They have everything, DVDs, CDs, books. It's kind of a nostalgia site, oldies.com.
What do you think the legacy is of the Naked City? I mean, we talk about the shows today, the cop shows now that are in location. Is there an influence?
I don't know. I think it paved the way. It certainly paved the way for other shows to be done in New York, filmed in New York. They came out with a show with George C. Scott shortly after, or maybe toward the latter part of Naked City, East Side, West Side, which is the show he did in Cicely. Tyson was in it with him, right. And he was a social worker. And then they did a show with Burt Reynolds called Hawk. Then they did a show called NYPD with Jack Warden, Robert Hooks, and Frank Converse, about 3 detectives in New York. That ran for a couple years. And that was a showcase for people like Al Pacino, I guess, and other young up-and-coming actors. And I think all those shows were able to be produced because of the success of Naked City, which was a pioneer show in New York, as far as filming a weekly series.
Well, I want to thank you for coming on, Jim, to talk about
Well,
Naked
thank you
City.
for having me. It's always fun, and we need more people like you to keep the nostalgia alive, because there's a lot of people out there that relish it and long for it, and that feel, hey, they don't make them like they used to,
There are 8 million stories in the Naked City. This has been one of them.